Okay, that now. And is this on? This is on us, our end.
Yep.
Hey, Berenica.
Hey, how are you guys?
Now, if she wanted to share her slides as she presents virtually,
Yeah.
how do we do that?
So let's just check the instructions for present. If you're presenting virtually, should be able to share screen.
Okay.
Start video and mute.
So should we close out of this?
Sorry.
Should we close out of this PowerPoint if she's going to share her screen?
Oh, is she the first?
Yeah.
Okay, right. We don't need this. We do need to do that.
Sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to just get the next one queued up?
Sure. So the next one would be, I think it's Magnuson. 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 Sorry, to be clear, Yusuf Suleiman, I don't have any information about him or his presentation.
Okay.
So I don't.
Yeah.
I think so. So, Berenica, would you like? Are you able to share your screen?
I think I can't at the moment. It says cannot share while another participant is sharing. Oh, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Okay.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
No problem.
So we're sharing. Meeting controls. Where's he going now?
It's your okay, so we have to frågan är de andra fallen bara. Berenica.
Hello?
can you try to switch screens? Because we were looking at your
Oh,
presenter view and not
Oh.
the.
you don't want my slides on the screen? Oh, you have the presenter view. I'm sorry. Gosh, I wonder, whoops. I wonder why that's happening.
So I think if you choose display settings on top.
New share chat.
On top of PowerPoint.
On top of the, oh, I see. Sorry, 1 second.
Just about your
No. Display settings. Oh, here we go.
swap presenter
swap.
view and slideshow.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Did you want me to start?
I'll be in the back.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to session A3 on data management and archiving at this year's IASSIST. My name is Halley Riley, and I'll be your chair for this session. I am, I'm a data services specialist at Georgia State University in the Research Data Services Department, host in our library. So I'm in Atlanta, Georgia from the States. Very happy to talk about our program and the work we're doing with anyone during some of the social breaks. So to begin our session, I'd like to introduce Berenica, who, sorry, my notes are on my phone. Berenica Vejvoda, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your last name, is the research data librarian at the University of Windsor. In this capacity, she is responsible for the coordination and the coordination and management of the academic data center. She is also responsible for leading the development and deployment of research data management services for the University of Windsor as part of a campus-wide initiative. Berenica also serves as the academic director for the University of Windsor's branch of Statistics Canada's Research Data Center. Berenica's research interests focus on social determinants of health for marginalized populations with an intersectional lens. Prior to joining LEDI, Berenica worked as a data librarian at UC San Diego, the University of Toronto, and McGill University. And Berenica, you can begin.
Okay, great. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm in my office at 5 a.m. Here in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. So
we can hear you just fine.
Oh, you can hear me just fine. Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity. Sorry, I haven't had coffee. The McDonald's on the way over was out of coffee. For the opportunity to speak. I want to start by just saying that the conference theme appealed to me in terms of the word design. And when I first saw that, I thought design sort of connotates intention. And so I want to talk about research data management practices that are developed with intention to reduce invisibility and to promote equity across the research data life cycle for sexual and gender minority people. So as I mentioned, it's 5 a.m. here, but I'm ready to go. And I really do wish I was actually in Sweden. So I'm quite sad not to be there. So before I start, I just want to give some credit out to colleagues. I recently presented at RDAP, which I'm sure a lot of folks at IASSIST have attended or at least familiar with. And there I definitely also mentioned this article that was published last year, Do I Have to Be an Other to Be Myself? And my colleagues that are noted in the citation did an excellent job going through the research data life cycle on a very similar topic. So I've sort of adapted to make it a little different from the article that was published. The coincidence is that I have a very similar area of research that I'm trying to develop for myself. And I'm sort of at a stage where I just started a PhD program in social work. And I think that my lens for data services is sort of shaping into bringing in more sort of cultural and social context. By training and other presentations I've done at IASSIST in the past, I think I've been a little bit more on the technical side. So this is a little bit different for me, where I'm going to be talking sort of more from I would say a data critical studies standpoint. So I will be focusing on the population of sexual, gender, minority people, but I do want to make the point that I think that most of what I'm saying is applicable to most marginalized groups. I used this specific subpopulation just because it's of interest to me. So I do want to say that it is a complex construct. And then I have a bullet here that just basically says what your standard definition of what SGM means. So it does include individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, transgender, two-spirit, queer, or intersex. So it is a complex construct. And I want to start by just noting some assumptions for my presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm bringing a social lens to this, and I do strongly believe that research data management is obviously situated in a larger context, so social, political, and cultural context, and that data is not neutral. And I know that in my day-to-day work, I often treat data as neutral, but I think I'm sort of developing a critical lens where I'm very much recognizing that it's not. And what I mean by that is that structural oppressions such as social stigma, violence, harm, all shape data and can increase marginalization. And that can translate to reducing not only the value of research data in terms of, producing inaccuracies or compromising the quality of research data, but also potentially creating harm to research participants. And the other assumption, sort of the corollary of this, is that data inclusivity will reduce invisibility and discrimination against marginalized groups and also empower. More assumptions. I do believe that inclusivity should be reflected in all stages of the research data lifecycle. Also, with the population that I'm specifically looking at, there is a recognition that, for example, gender identity, sexual orientation can change over time. And another assumption is that I think it's important to have a critical lens to evaluate how LGBTQ plus data is used. And the lens that I'm sort of bringing to all this is some of the coursework that I've done so far in my social work program, looks a lot at critical theory and post-structuralism. So that's sort of the lens that I've sort of wrapped around this. Sort of extending the Goffman article that I mentioned, I've sort of added a little bit about ethical considerations. And in the UK, specifically UKRI, on their website, there is actually an interesting sort of section where the LGBT Foundation, which is a non-for-profit group, has adapted the Economic and Social Research Council's UKRI principles. And so the first one relates to integrity and quality. And I'm just going to go through some of these principles that should be sort of, I think, considered when working with LGBTQ plus data. So some of the ethical considerations, first of all, integrity and quality, some of the questions that that I think data professionals should ask themselves, and researchers, are what research questions are worth asking? Do they add to existing knowledge? So as you can imagine, LGBTQ plus communities are not always strongly represented in research. So always, if there's a good opportunity where LGBTQ plus can be added to or made central to, that's usually a positive thing. And a lens should be sort of given to how knowledge benefits the community, and it's important to amplify the voices of LGBTQ+ participants rather than speak for them. Another question to ask, and that relates to integrity and quality, is do I, as a researcher or as a data professional helping researchers with research data management, have good knowledge of the community I intend to work with? So very simply, you want to familiarize yourself with a full spectrum of the topic, whether, so this doesn't have to be SGM, it could be another subpopulation that is marginalized. But for example, with my area, being familiar with the full spectrum, for example, of gender identity, social and political issues that affect the lives of, for example, trans people, to use inclusive language. Another principle that the LGBTQ Foundation sort of applied to the UKRI principles is fully informing researchers and participants. So how informed and aware are the research staff? So you want to make sure that, I mean, researchers are obviously not prejudiced. You want to make sure that researchers are knowledgeable about issues relating to the population at hand, and so they can adequately inform participants. Confidentiality and anonymity is huge, and some questions around this might be how might my research affect confidentiality? So addressing it at the very beginning of the data lifecycle. So, for example, with my topic with LGBTQ+ participants, there should be extra care to preserve confidentiality and anonymity. Keep in mind things like people may not be comfortable with their identities being known. So having that responsibility to ascertain that information is not shared outside, for example, a research team, if you're the researcher. Another question might be, how might my research methods affect confidentiality and anonymity? So looking critically as you manage your data at the research methods that you're using. So for example, if you're using any kind of group-based methods, you want to be able to stress to participants not disclose identities of anyone in attendance, as this could obviously out participants without their permission. It's important to consider the setting that you're conducting research to avoid outing participants. So for example, if you're doing research in a school or a work environment, you need to be very careful. Very similarly, you want to avoid harm. So addressing, asking yourself questions like, what sensitivities will my research data collection capture? And discrimination is not always obvious. So you want to look at that carefully. Again, the language that you use is important. You don't want to ask anything of your participants that could be offensive. And then as we go through the data life cycle, first, you're obviously collecting data. And I think there needs to be an element of intentionality. So by that, I mean that if you're collecting data on a marginalized group, you collect only if required for the research question at hand. So asking yourself something like minimally what is necessary, and you want to be able to identify gaps. So if, for example, LGBTQ+ as a demographic is not part of, say, a survey, how will that affect future research? So you want to be able to think forward as well. You want to be able to capture sexual orientation or gender identity in terms of my area in all of its complexity. Again, this is generalizable to other groups. And when you're collecting data, allowing for multiple options so that people can choose as many that apply. As I mentioned, these constructs are very complex. So in my area, for example, there would be more than one orientation. There could be generational differences in terms of how constructs are defined or viewed. And some categories might be more stigmatized than others. As you're collecting data, it's important to think about disaggregation to accurately describe your population at hand. So you can look at, for example, small levels of geography, sex, age, income, race, ethnicity, and other variables. You want to be able to ask open-ended questions. And definitely the Goffman article talked a lot about avoiding other categories and also allowing for optional responding. So not everyone will be comfortable answering all questions. So to have that flexibility in, say, a survey would be important. And most of this presentation does sort of have a lens around survey data. But obviously, as we know, data can be almost any kind of methodology or file format if it's used for analytical purposes. To enhance accurate responding and the willingness of participants to participate in your research, you want to consider things like, is it better to do a survey versus an interview, training interviewers, and enhancing privacy where possible. So there are some best practices for asking questions, for example, about sexual orientation on surveys. This is just a snapshot of the law school at UCLA, where self-identification, sexual behavior, sexual attraction are sort of 3 tenets of what to ask. And even reading this, I can see how, this is, the response options are quite binary. So really thinking through what the constructs mean is important. And I'm speaking to you obviously from Canada. So, looking at secondary data sources, if you're collecting original research data, you want to see how constructs have been defined in secondary data sources. So for example, one of our major social surveys, health surveys from Statistics Canada, our central statistical agency is the Canadian Community Health Survey. And for example, sexual orientation is defined on the website in the data dictionary. And we also actually in our census capture the classification of married or common law partners as being either opposite sex or same sex. And, looking at some of these sort of definitions in official secondary data sources can also help you, formulate maybe richer definitions if there's things that are missing from these population-based surveys. We actually made a big breakthrough. Canada is the first country in our 2021 census to actually look at gender identity. So there's some definitions here. As you move along to processing and analyzing data, obviously with storage, you want to look at security as you would with any other research data. So given the sensitivity of the topic, definitely you'd be looking at secure storage. Processing data, as I mentioned, you might have a lot of open-ended text fields to capture richness, but then you might be doing a lot more data cleaning to make things consistent, but you don't want to take away from the richness. So there's a bit of a balance there to be struck. With analysis, you might be recoding to say larger umbrella categories. You might be linking to older data sets, so doing some harmonization work, and definitions obviously change over time. So going back to that, some of the assumptions that I mentioned at the beginning, there may be generational differences between how these constructs are defined. And so there might be some harmonization work that needs to take place in order for you to compare apples to apples. And again, you want to make sure that you keep disaggregated data for the richness for your inferential analysis and for future researchers that might potentially reuse your data. So confidentiality, as I mentioned, is really important. So in the processing and analysis stage, you would be like with a lot of different research data sets, creating de-identified or anonymized public use files. You might be aggregating to higher levels of geography and collapsing variables. You'll be documenting changes and versioning, and obviously keeping a master file. And if you can't sufficiently anonymize, then I do believe that setting up access by request is not always a bad thing. I know that the community is a little split on this point. You want to make data as open as possible, but sometimes that's not possible. So having a strong data use agreement might be necessary to control access for confidential files. For preservation, I want to touch on metadata to say that You obviously want to capture study level and variable level metadata. You want to obviously have a codebook that explains the methodology and data structure. And you want to, and this is sort of maybe a more unique point, you want to deposit where LGBTQ plus researchers and the LGBTQ plus community is likely to find your data. And I think that's a point I sort of want to stress, because I think that in the sort of sharing stage, which I'll get to next, we don't really focus there as much as some of the other stages like preservation, which is a very important and large area. So I think that definitely where you deposit can make a really big difference. And you want to advocate to repositories that already exist to adopt inclusive metadata standards. So I think I have one slide that's coming up. There is a schema called the Homosaurus. So there are definitely metadata standards that have been developed, are continuing to be developed for SGM people. And I do want to make the point that having just the metadata in a repository obviously isn't terrible if the data is too sensitive and cannot be sufficiently anonymized. Another point about metadata that I've been reading a lot about with marginalized groups is that sometimes crowdsourcing metadata, and I know that there's issues around consistency, but if repositories can set up crowdsourcing of metadata to reflect terms that the community uses, and the terms change very quickly in some of these communities, so crowdsourcing can actually be a very positive thing. In terms of sharing and reusing data, I do really want to stress, don't just park it. I think this is where I think there's a little bit of uniqueness to what I know that a lot of the points I'm making sort of generalized to other research data, but I think it's really important to advocate to key stakeholders. So whether that be researchers or policymakers, or the LGBTQ community itself. And that can really enhance empowerment and make sure that the data gets to stakeholders who have a vested interest in reusing your data in a timely manner. And it's also important to break down access barriers. So not only disseminating in accessible formats, but linking to, for example, linking data to open access publications. In terms of future directions, I think it's important to look at most of what I've just talked about sort of relates to surveys, but I think there's obviously research that might capture image data, videos, audio, text. So looking at research data for marginalized groups in terms of other data types. And obviously, I think because marginalized groups are often left out of the picture, future directions should focus on creating more LGBT plus data, especially population-based studies. So that's usually statistical agencies, but advocating for that as well. And advocating for more funding for data collection, analysis, and use, so that we can produce high quality data sets that are available and usable. I'd also like to advocate for future direction that more standardized and richer up-to-date metadata standards are adopted by repositories. So for example, I mentioned the Homosaurus, which is an international LGBTQ plus linked data vocabulary. So seeing this continue to develop as well as other similar taxonomies and schemas. One thing I'd like to sort of start to close on is that when I was preparing for this, I always think of the distinction between data and information and knowledge. And so as we know, data refers to raw facts. It usually has no contextual meaning, and it's just numbers, or whether it be text or images or another data type. And it's not organized and it doesn't depend on information. Information has meaning and it's organized and it depends on data. I'd like to just make the point that I think that with data just being raw facts and no context, I think what I'm trying to get at here is that context matters. We often think of data as being neutral and just factual, but I think data really needs to be wrapped in a social layer. And so, for example, with the FAIR principles, I think research data should be fair, but it should also be inclusive. So to have data that's findable or accessible, for example, you want to make sure that you're, for example, as I mentioned in the sharing stage, you're actually promoting your data to relevant stakeholders, accessible, making sure that the community, which might not have access to paid or repositories that require certain academic memberships, you want to make sure that you have this lens of inclusivity with research data. So that actually concludes my presentation. So I'm not sure how to stop sharing here, but thank you for your time, and I hope everybody has a wonderful conference.
Thank you so much for that, Berenica. Are you okay with taking questions at the end of all the presentations, or would you like to take them now?
Oh, at the end is totally fine.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So next, is Yusuf on the line? I think that one of our presenters is not able to attend today, so we are going to skip to you, Simon. And do you want to do the PDF or the PowerPoint?
PowerPoint.
And then Rufus will help us get this
Okay.
going. And then I'll just do a brief introduction.
Hey.
Thanks for everyone's patience as we navigate this new hybrid world. Oh, it was up.
Should be the Zoom. Okay, don't touch anything. So, is it okay if I just introduce you? Go ahead. Check that people watching.
Can people on Zoom Berenica, could you unmute and just let us know if you can see the slide?
Oh, actually, did I not stop sharing? I'm so sorry. Oops. Sorry.
Anyone else who's on Zoom, if you could let us know, just unmute and give a yay or nay.
No, I can't see the slides.
Great.
We just need to find a way to share it. Yeah, so which is easier said than done.
We can't see that on this, so that's what's going on here.
Nej, det är länge som jag krånglade.
You can let her know. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for bearing with us. So now I'd like to introduce Simon Eckert. Simon studied sociology at the University of Wuppertal in Germany, which I know that I mispronounced that one. Since May 2021, he has been working with GESIS Leibniz Institute for the Social Sciences in Cologne, Germany, as a research assistant and project coordinator in the joint project Domain Data Protocols for Empirical Educational Research, or DDP education, which focuses on the development of an RDM tool.
Yes, thank you, Haley, for your kind introduction. Whoops. Do you hear me good? Yeah, right? Okay. And thank you for the opportunity to present my or our DDP project, which developed the standardized data management plan for educational research. Yeah, as most of you probably know. Okay. Now I can share the slides. Okay, perfect. Was it? Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, as most of you probably know, the relevance of research data management is increasing continuously, e.g. for research funders who aim to ensure the reusability of data in order to use resources efficiently, as well as for journalists and the research community in general, which are interested in ensuring the replicability of research findings. With this increasing demand for research data management, there also is an increasing demand for tools facilitating this research data management. That's because RDM is still quite a challenging topic for a lot of researchers, especially in the early career. I myself can attest to that. So one such tool that aims to guide researchers through the often complex field that is research data management is our newly developed standardized data management plan called STAMP. The STAMP is based upon the concept of domain data protocols by Science Europe, about which I will going to talk more a little bit later on. But next we will have a close look at the project. We did aim to develop a research data management tool for the educational research in Germany. We that are in total 12 partner institutes who are listed here on the right side. Most of them are directly involved in educational research. All of them are involved in research infrastructure. We were funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and the project did start in June 2019 and did end almost a week ago now, at the end of May 2022. A little bit later. Okay, perfect. So in summary, the project did aim to develop a research data management tool for the social science and for the education research that aims to assist researchers in doing excellent research data management and enables the replicability of research findings and data, and also simplifies the reviewing processes for journals and funders. Lastly, the project did aim to develop, to support the long-term data preservation and data sharing in general. So now, as promised, we will have a closer look at the concept which is the base for the stamp, the domain data protocol concept by St. Europe. They defined DDPs as generally agreed upon guidelines or predefined written procedural methods. One might also conceive a DDP as a model DMP for a given domain or community that shares common method. So maybe the easiest way to think about a DDP is as a standardized model DMP for a specific domain for a certain type of data and particular research objects. As you notice, I'm kind of conflating the two terms, DDP and stamp. That's because you could think about we develop the stamp out of the DDP concept, and a stamp is our interpretation of a DDP. Next, I will show a little a comparison between a classic DMP template and the stamp we are offering now. Most of the DMP templates are quite generic. That's because they are not focusing on the data use or the research objects examined, nor are they developed for a specific domain or the community or the needs and requirements of this domain's research community. Most critical, all DMP templates are structured around a set of questions on which the researcher must find their own answers, hardly providing them with any kind of advice on how to do good research data management. The stamp, on the other hand, is structured around a set of domain-specific questions in form of checklists, as you can see on the right side, and aims to assist the researcher in answering these questions by providing them with supporting material, such as recommendation and use cases, as you can see here highlighted in red. So next we will have a closer look at the structure of a stamp and how it's built up from the inside. On the most basic level, a stamp consists of a core and a supporting framework. The core itself can be divided into two parts, a dynamic one and a static one. The dynamic part of the core of the stamp we call basic module. The basic module consists in turn of 4 different sheets on various topics, such as details of the stamp, e.g. the version of the stamp or the person responsible for the stamp. Second, information on the stamp, e.g. the title of the project, the staff members involved in the project, and the funder of the project. And third, information on the data, e.g. the data type or the data collection method used. So in general, a stamp or the basic module of the stamp serves 2 main functions. First, it should help to specify the stamp to the actual project needs one project has, and secondly, it should give you an overview over different aspects, such as the project, e.g. for application and reports, for over the metadata, in the context of registering the data in archives, and an overview over the files which needs to be managed in terms of the storage volume or certain contents requiring special protection. Now we had the look at the dynamic part of the stamp. Now we have a closer look at the static part of the stamp, which consists of 8 different modules on how good research data management and fair data in our domain should look like. It's important to note that we did not impose these requirements from the outside onto the community, but developed them within an iterative process through various evaluation and requirements workshops with the community for the community. That's something we are very proud of, and so I had to note this. Yeah, so now after we had the closer look at the core of the stamp, we will have a more detailed look at the supporting framework, which consists of two different elements. First, an introduction with general information on the stamp, the structure of the stamp, and how to actually use it. And then supporting glossary with definitions on RDM and stamp-specific terms, which is, of course, very helpful for researchers and users who are not familiar with research data management in general. So next, we will have a closer look at one such module and how it is structured. We did follow with the stamp a multi-level approach, meaning that the different modules of the stamps are consisting of 3 different levels. On the first level, a module consists of requirements and on what fair data looks like and explanation on the meaning of these requirements. On the second level, the user will find checklists on RDM activities to ensure that the requirements from the first level are actually met. And besides these checklists, there are also legal requirements, if necessary, which is the case, for example, in the data protection and copyright law module. On the third level, the stamp finally includes the supporting material, such as recommendations, use cases, and further resources. The recommendation containing documentation standards such as DDI, best practice guidelines of research associations, or guidelines of research data centers and repositories. The use cases are short examples on how different RDM activities can be planned and implemented. And the further resources, and within the further resources, the researcher can find additional guidance on how to additional guidance such as webinars, tutorials, and textbooks. So now we are coming to the probably most important thing, where you will be able to access the stamp in the later or in the future. As you notice, they are now not accessible right now. We are currently in the process of handing them over to the hand of the Verbund FDB, which is the German network of education research data, which is an infrastructure provider for federal archiving and data sharing. They will be responsible for the further maintenance and development of the stamps, and will make them accessible as soon as possible through one way over their website in form of PDF files. You will be able to download the different checklists and the supporting materials. A second way of accessing the stamp will be the offline version, the online version through RDMO, which is a research data management organizer, which is a tool to customize your own data management plans. So this is the second way, yeah. And the last way you will be able to access the stamp is through GitHub, where we will put everything for everyone to freely use it and further develop it and hopefully implement it in different domains. Yeah, that's it for the moment. Thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have, if you are interested in the project and in the matter in general, please have a look at our project website. And if you want to ask some special questions, please write me an email. Thank you a lot. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. It looks fantastic, very interesting. I have quite a long list of questions. The first one is, how does STAMP make the life of researchers easier? So how much time would they need to write a data management plan using this tool?
Yeah.
You also mentioned now in the end of your presentation, you offer it in different forms, online, as PDF, on GitHub. How come do you come closer to the goal of having machine actionable data management plans that can be part of workflows for data management? That would be an important aspect of designing such tools. I stop at this point. Thank you.
So thank you. That's a very good question. First of all, it obviously makes the work for researchers easier in the terms of they only have to do it one time. We are advising that the stamp is to be worked on through the whole project phases, starting with the planning phase of the project, through the actual implementation phase, and then the post-project phase. So the goal is that you are continuously updating the stamp, and every information you are documenting in the stamp, you are also able to further use, for example, in the terms of applications, if you are already start to work on it in the project planning phase or further reporting. And this is something we think will make the life a lot of easier. At least that's the feedback we received through the various evaluation workshops, which we held with a lot of researchers, FDM experts, and funders within the education and research community.
Second question was about the different formats it's available in. Or do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, how would you be able to make data management mesh and actionable so that they can become part of workflows?
This is a question maybe my partner Anja will answer for you.
Thank you. My name is Anja Perry. I also worked for this project and I was the project co-lead. And I think to clarify something, the researchers don't need to write the data management plan anymore. They have the survey in the beginning and then it's written for them. So this is what we automated. And then Simon mentioned that was a large part of the project that we implement this in the RDMO, it's the Research Data Management Organizer. And we've written it for the German community. It's all in German for now. We wish to translate it also. We wish to translate it to other disciplines also, but the RDMO is something very known in Germany and a lot of people, a lot of researchers moving towards RDMO. Still, they have to write the data management plan in the RDMO themselves, and RDMO changed it for us so that they implemented our approach. Just to have the survey in the beginning, then everything is in there and they can work with the RDMO, and it's very interactive. And something during the project changes, they can change it in the RDMO. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Simon and Anja.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Now I'll introduce our third speaker, Diana Magnuson. Diana's full-time association with the University of Minnesota's Institute for Social Research and Data Innovation as a curator and historian began in September 2021 through her connection to the historical census projects stretching back to her graduate research work on the original 1880 Ipums and 1880 procedural history. Over the course of her career, she has been connected to the Minnesota Population Center as a consulting census historian and visiting scholar. In her current role, she is responsible for research preparing procedural histories, documenting Ipums USA, historical data collection, managing the physical collection of census and survey documentation for Ipums, managing the preservation of digital collections for Ipums, MPC, and LCC, education and outreach, and maintaining the ISRDI institutional archive. She has a blog, which can be found at blog.popdata.org, that highlights the ISRDI and MPC archival exhibits. Her research and scholarly output has focused on the history of the US Census of Population, with an emphasis on enumeration issues and procedural histories. Diana's co-presenter, Wendy Thomas, joined the Minnesota Population Center as the data archivist in 2001. She was an initial co-PI on the National Historic Geographic Information System for US Aggregate Census. She has worked closely with the State Data Center Program of the US Census Bureau since 1990 as lead of a coordinating agency and provider of customized products from federal data sources. Her primary area of research and work for the past 20 years has been in the area of metadata and archive standards. She's been active in the development of products for the DDI Alliance since 1998, with a focus on accurately capturing and relaying the data relationships and aggregate data and geographical content.
Right, good morning. It's a privilege to be here today with you all to present Expanding Our Perspective, Building a Sustainable Metadata Culture. Wendy has been thinking about these issues for the last 2 decades. My last 2 decades of archival experience was in a more traditional archive at a different university. I started working with Wendy, as Halley noted, in only 9 months ago. And the work to put together this presentation has been hugely formative for me to understand the history of the Institute's metadata culture. It's going to let me just the arrow key. No luck on the arrow key. Double click. No luck. Do I still need to double click? Okay, let's use the arrows. Okay, all right, here we are again. All right, so our outline for today is very simple and has just 5 parts. I am an historian, so I need to have a timeline. I need to see the change over time and our institutional context. So in 1991, our organization created our first structured metadata system for data integration, which we call harmonization, and I'll use that term frequently. A couple of years following, we started disseminating our data through an anonymous FTP site. In 1995, Ipums launched a website with a data extract system. In 97, hypertext variable level documentation started to become available for our users. And in 2000, the Minnesota Population Center was organized at the University of Minnesota. In 2016, we underwent something of a reorganization and a rebranding, and we became the Institute for Social Research and Data Innovation. And in that same year, we also started registering DOIs. From 2013, whoops, I didn't want to go any further, sorry. All right, from 2013 to the present, we have been about the process of submitting an application for the data seal of approval, which is now called the Core Trust Seal. So this is a visualization of our institution, and it helps you to see our organization. So at the umbrella organization is ISRDI, which we call it, but the Institute for Social Research and Data Innovation, that's kind of a mouthful. And we have 4 centers there now: the Minnesota Population Center, the Life Course Center, Ipums, which that will be the main focus of my presentation here, and then the Minnesota Research Data Center. And Ipums is the primary work that Wendy and I are about the business of, and that work, the Ipums work, is data harmonization, making data compatible across time and space. And our data comes from a variety of places. It comes from the US Census Bureau. It comes from the United Nations, from over 100 international organizations, from a couple of proprietary organizations like Ancestry and Family Search and others. And you can see the 9 Ipums projects there in the middle. And some of the projects actually have sub-projects like Ipums Global Health. So we had a watershed moment around 2013, 14, somewhere in there. And what was happening was Wendy began to hear about this, questions of, what are these DOIs? What is this? And increasingly, our funding organizations were requiring that we adhere to a standard archival practice so that was their expectation. And so we needed to evaluate our processes around a standard archival practice. And the decision that was made to use DOIs in 2016 meant that several things were going to happen. And that meant that we were going to capture our data and metadata for specific versions of our projects. It meant that we needed to provide persistent access to those specific versions of our products. And we needed to maintain and provide access over time. So there were some payoffs. There were some internal payoffs for that when we made that decision. And those payoffs, the identifiers were persistent and unique. Our references and related publications were trackable, not only for the curators, but also for our researchers and for others who had that need for that information. Our data and metadata was captured and preserved, and our preservation work became more accurate, more complete, and more consistent. So that motivated us to apply for a Core Trust Seal certification. So this process of applying for the Core Trust Seal. And we want you to appreciate the fact that Ipums is not a standard archive. So Ipums is not like the archive that I came from, where I did 20 years of work. And Ipums' primary responsibility is creating harmonized data products and making them available for researchers. So our provenance metadata generated by our work is our responsibility, and also targeted archival responsibilities are for the products that we produce. So that makes us a unique kind of archive. The CTS application required us to examine our archival processes using a standard framework like the OAIS model. And as I said, Ipums is not a standard archive. And so that meant and when I say we, I really mean Wendy and a few others, but primarily Wendy, needed to look at additional models of organization, like the General Statistical Business Process Model, to provide detail on the archival role within Ipums. So that's where she began. So the CTS steps, the CTS application forced us to describe our archival responsibility within our organization. And again, CTS offered up this OAIS model. And because the OAIS model is too generic in terms of its archival centric nature, and Ipums isn't a standard archive, we needed to construct a model that better fit how our archival process fits into the organization. So we looked at some business process models, as I said. So the General Statistical Business Process Model, and then a second generation of that, the General Longitudinal Business Process Model. And Wendy and others created a customization of that to the outcome of which was the Ipums Business Process Model. And the next several set of slides that I have here will show you what that looks like visually. But the bottom line for us was that we needed to see what were the submission points for the archive, and what do we do with the content that we get, and then how do we provide access to that content. So here's an image. This is probably very familiar to many of you, the standard OAIS model, which, as I said, did not fit how our archive worked. So this is I have 3 slides around this visualization of the Ipums business process model. And this is from the perspective of our projects. So those 9 projects that I showed you, those 9 Ipums projects, how they view, to the extent that they think about the archive and how their stuff gets curated, this is how they might think of it. So you have the external producer and submitting their data, the source data, and that input goes into the Ipums process. So that Ipums process, this is the top square in the middle there. So that process of integration, organization, harmonization, cleaning, processing records. And we come alongside and attach the DOI. We take a snapshot of the data and the metadata, creating the SIP, plus administrative information. It gets stored in the Ipums live data store system, which then the user can use our extract system to download their data. And we're also off on my left, your right, your left too. The SIP plus the preservation information. So again, this is from the perspective, this is how that business process model looks from the perspective of those 9 projects. Now this visualization shows you how we think of what we are doing, and you can appreciate that our responsibility is much richer and much more diverse than is perceived on the outside by those projects. But again, it has that same flow with the external producers, the supplemental information that's coming in, but we do a preservation copy. We're creating bibliographic records around some of those materials. Things are put into permanent archival storage. We create the SIP and the AIP. We have past version, and then we're working on developing a document access system. And then you see the Ipums producer on the right side and our customer and the way that they can negotiate getting information from us. Now, this next slide is the 2 pieces together. So this is our Ipums business process model. And for me, when Wendy presented this to me, this was just an enormous aha moment. I could see the flow and I could understand what are all the elements that are going on within our organization. And most importantly, for my role as curator, where are the touch points that the archive can expect to touch the project work? So this was hugely important to me. The next area or topic that I want to cover is the general activity areas. And so another piece of the core trust seal process was we needed to map our general activity areas. So I know this is lots of text on this, but what I want you to appreciate in here is to see this as a map. And across the bottom, you have the 9 general activity areas. So on the tiny print that you can't read, the darker gray is 1 through 9, left to right, those general activity areas. And so what this does is it identifies the activities that our projects are going through and the sub-activities within those main areas. And it helps us to see what our projects are engaged in and what the potential touch points are for the archive. This is the same mapping of those 9 general activity areas, but the green highlights possible metadata production requiring provenance tracking. And again, for me as a new person in this role, this was so helpful to see, okay, where are those points that metadata is being produced and where we need to step in and capture it or be prepared or anticipate that it's being developed. And this is another, again, it's the same 9 general activity areas, but it highlights the processes related to content and construction of the SIP, of the archival information package, and the distribution information packages. So again, very helpful to see sort of the lay of the land and what activity areas are generating metadata. So just to summarize, the value of this activity mapping approach, a common vocabulary can be used by project staff and our curators to discuss our activities. So if we're all on the same page, we all understand what are our 9 activity areas, what are the sub-activities, we can have much more productive conversation about what we are doing. There's value in common tools understood by our IT staff. If a tool is being developed for one project in one area, they can see, because of the map, where other projects are likely to be able to make use of that. And so we can move that across, push that out with to other projects. It's very valuable to our administrative staff because they can see process developments and those can be identified that could be beneficial across projects. And then, and I think this is so genius about this mapping activity is that each project has a unique path through those common activities, but they determine it. They determine their unique path through. But for us, the curators, we can focus on the commonalities. We don't care what order they do them in, but we pay attention to when things are being produced, and so that's very helpful to us, and it's helpful to the individual projects. So our lessons, our takeaways from this, providing a framework to evaluate what we have in place, what we should have in place, and how to move toward international standards. And so in our effort to develop a metadata culture, this process going through our application for the Core Trust Seal has taught us some of these things. And one of them is providing a framework. And the mapping, our archival touch points within the organization. As I said, for me personally, a new person in this role, that was so helpful to see the range of activities and where the metadata is being produced. Explaining to our organization the value of archiving. And maybe you are in an organization in which you have archival responsibility and you feel like you're those two blue squares out on the side hanging out there. And so being able to explain to your organization how valuable you are, showing them the visualization of the activities that you're doing and how they're not extraneous, but they are absolutely essential to the work. And so archival organization also can be explained through the mapping and the business process model and how we naturally fit into their processes. Clarifying, as I said, clarifying IT processes, which helps with return to scale. So if we can say, okay, IT is developing this thing over here for this project, but now all that investment can also be pushed out to the other projects. That's a huge lesson to us. Preserving intellectual content. So this is value added in this process because we can say to our project managers, we're not only about the business of preserving that end point, that end product that you're pushing out, but we are also preserving your intellectual content as you develop that product. And so that's a huge value added for our project managers and for the projects. It's helped our organization to look outward, not just at our internal processes. We've been able to demonstrate to our external data partners high stewardship standards with their data and our resulting products. And then lastly, funding. I've heard that word mentioned a number of times already in the last couple of days, that this is a concern for us and for everyone. And so being able to demonstrate to a funding agency how a new initiative can be put out across projects is something that I think funders are very interested in hearing, that it's not just a one-off, but it's something that can be used across projects and very beneficial. All right, thank you.
Okay, we're getting it. So our final speaker for today for the session will be Anja Perry. Dr. Perry works for the GESIS Data Services for the Social Sciences and is responsible for data acquisition and research data management trainings. She is also the official representative and contact person for the ICPSR Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at GESIS. She joined GESIS in 2012 to work for the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies research team. Until 2016, she coordinated the preparation of the German PIAAC National Report and was responsible for archiving and distributing the German PIAAC data. Anja completed her PhD thesis, Decision-Making and Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Max Planck Institute of Economics in DFG Graduate College. The Economics of Innovative Change at the University of Jena in 2010. After her studies, she worked at the German Federal Statistical Office in Wiesbaden. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And my topic is the time we spend on data curation. And this is nothing new to this audience here. We know that research data management is work and that it needs to be funded. And there's one famous article by Barend Mons who says we should invest 5% of the research funds in making the data reusable. However, this number is very broad, and we also know that the nature of the data can be very diverse, and some data might need more work, and some data might need less work. And at the same time, this is also a question that we get again and again in our RDM workshops that we give at home. We tell researchers what they need to do, that they have to do it from the beginning on, that they have to take care of their data, and that they also can apply for funds for this work. But then, of course, the question comes, well, how much funding can I apply for this work? And then we never have an answer. And so this is a question that we wanted to answer for ourselves and also for the researchers in our classes for a very, very long time already. And we started to look into the literature. And I must say that the SESTA cost benefit user guide is a very, very good source if you want to look into this kind of work on research data costs. But however, they are all directed to infrastructure, so they don't really solve our questions on what to tell researchers and how much funding they should apply for. But I want to give you a little bit of overview. So we have cost models that was work done by the Keeping Research Data Safe project, also the 4C project, and also DANS did work on this. Basically, this is targeted infrastructure and how they are funded. And then building up on this, they looked at cost data, and here the infrastructure institutions, so archives, can compare themselves to other archives and see, like, where do I spend more money than in a comparable archive, and where do I spend less money? And then at the top of the pyramid are rules of funds. Still also not close to what we were aiming at, but rules of funds are, for example, the common law that we have that, for example, digital storage space gets cheaper over time. This is something that archives need to work with. Still not very useful for the researchers for their research project. And we used a different approach. We used a project that we ran at GESIS in 2016 and 17, and this was to restructure our services. We went from giving the researchers everything for free. We did everything for them, to offering a basic service for free. And then if they want to have some extras, like some more thorough checks, or some more elaborate data documentation, then we charge them. And this is the model that we have now. But to get there, we had to know where we spend our time and money. And so we had 3 curators in the archive track their work or their working hours while they worked on 3 studies with multiple waves. So in total, we had 10 data sets that we could look at where they tracked their time, how much they spent on different tasks of data cleaning and on different tasks of data documentation. Unfortunately, for one study, for the third one, that has 2 data sets, we don't have the data for data documentation. So sadly, we sometimes have to reduce our data to 8 data sets. We look at 4 factors, 4 characteristics of data, and this is the number of variables, the number of questions, the number of open answer questions, and the number of questions affected by filters. And this is something that we also found in the literature, but this is also what we were aware of just from our work in the data archive, what curators already very frequently told us that this is decisive for their work. And of course, I want to highlight this. This is a very limited database. We only have 10 data points and sometimes only 8 data points. So what we really wanted to focus on was an interview with the 3 curators that worked in this pilot project. We were able to recruit them for a group interview. Even one curator already left, but he came back for the interview. And so we could really talk with those 3 curators that really worked with the data that we are looking at. Some general results. So interestingly, for each data set, our curators need 63 hours, so about 8 working days. And for each variable, on average, they need close to 8 minutes. The largest part of their work is data documentation. That's 3/4 of their time spent on the data, and 1/4 of their time is spent on data cleaning. For data cleaning, the largest part is labeling, like checking and correcting labels, and also the skip patterns, so the result of filters in a questionnaire. And then for documentation, really the largest part is the documentation of the questionnaire, and then comes creating the code book. These are the correlations. Again, a very limited database. But I'm reporting only the correlation coefficients that are significant. And also 2 numbers are in gray, and this is where the correlation coefficient is below 0.75. So we really don't want to overestimate or overinterpret these results. And we derived 3 patterns from here that I'm going to show you. And we took these 3 patterns to the interview with us and asked questions about it and found out how the curators work and how they organize themselves and how they organize their steps in curation. So one pattern was that the main factors of the 4 characteristics that we're looking at are the number of variables and the number of open answer questions. So we see they correlate overall with curation times, but also with cleaning and documentation, also with subtasks in these 2 tasks. Then all 4 characteristic correlate with the skip pattern structure. So that is checking and correcting filters in the data, whether they worked out well, whether they worked at all, how they worked, and whether they were well documented. And also checking and correcting labels for variables and values. And we also see that only the questionnaire documentation correlates with these 4 characteristics and not the following steps. So then we asked our curators, how do we make sense of this? What do you think of these results? And we really wanted to learn more about their process and how they work to understand the results that we got from this data. And first of all, they told us that they first do an initial check, and it takes about 1 or 2 hours. And that's when they familiarize themselves with the data set, learn what it is about, how it works, how the filters work, etc. And in this process, they already make small corrections. If they see some small mistakes, they correct it right away. And that wouldn't show up in the correlations, because in the correlations we look at tasks and subtasks, and they just wouldn't show up there. Also, we asked about wildcodes because I always imagine that checking for wildcodes and correcting them would be a very tedious and long task, but they said no, it's actually easy because they check all the labels. They do frequencies, and if they see a value without a label, that's a wildcode. But for that to work, they have to need proper labels. If the labeling is messy or is missing, they first have to work on the labels and then they can check for wildcodes. So this was a big eye-opener for us. And then we understood why we didn't see any correlations for wildcodes, which we always thought is very slow and a lot of work. Then the questionnaire documentation already involves a lot of the following steps. And that's especially true for the variable documentation. So when during questionnaire documentation, they already go through all the questions and all the variables. So a lot of times they already document the variable right away. So they do it in one step. And this is why we see such a large chunk, a large part for the questionnaire documentation, and we don't see any correlations with the other subtasks. They just do it in one step. What else have we learned? Well, we saw that there is a learning effect. We saw that nicely over the different waves of each study, how the time decreased. However, we didn't always see it. And then the curators confirmed that for this one study, the questions totally changed. So they couldn't rely on their previous routines and codes, and they had to start from the beginning, basically. And then we don't have this learning effect. We don't see it. But they also mentioned that, relying on previous code can also make you blind for unexpected errors. So this is also very dangerous. You cannot just rely on your routines. If you have a follow-up wave for a survey, for example, you really have to do all the checks again. And they acknowledge it, that they sometimes get blind for these unexpected errors. We also wondered about filters, why they did not always increase with the time spent on data. And they said the number of filters is not decisive, but how complex they are and whether they are well documented. And they also pointed out to us to studies they regularly work on that are more complex, and what they have to look for there and how it differs from the data that we are looking here. Also, low data quality increases the time spent on the data. I already mentioned how important labels are, but also sometimes they just cannot make sense of a study, or they don't understand it if it's not well documented. And then they have to go back to the data provider and ask questions. Sometimes these people are not reached anymore. They left projects. So that is very, it takes a long time for them. So high data quality from the beginning on and good preparation during fieldwork helps a lot with data curation later on. Also, they mentioned open answer questions, and we actually saw that in the data. If there's a lot, the time increases a lot. And this is because they had to go through each case and find out whether there's any revealing information in there and had to delete it or change it. And they mentioned this is the only time when the number of cases play a role. Usually that's not a factor. That's it's all the same. It really matters more on the number of variables, not so much number of cases. But when data protection issues with open answer questions are involved, then the number of cases play a role in the time spent on curation. And then, of course, they use DDI standards and tools, and they say that this is really, really helpful for them because it gives them a predefined structure, and they don't have to start anew with each study and define a structure for them. They already have it implemented in DDI and in their tools, and they can use it. The limitations, as I said, it's a very small data set. That's why we rely more on the interview with our curators. Also, the data that we have here is already of very high quality. It's a long-standing data provider that we could do this pilot project with. They know what we expect in their data delivery, and the data wasn't very complex. And as I said, curators sometimes pointed us to more complex studies and explained us how the process is there and how it is different for that type of data. And all our curators are very experienced and they use DDI tools, which helps them. It establishes a routine. And also very often they make steps in parallel, but they also said if the study gets too complex, they cannot do steps in parallel anymore because they run the risk to oversee something. And after with a certain complexity, they have to do it one by one, which was already also very interesting to hear. This is just very quick to tell you that this work was also part of the DDP project that Simon presented. The results went into one module of the DDP project, or the stamps, how we now call them. And a colleague also did an interview on qualitative data and what matters there, and how we could move on and measure time spent and money spent on qualitative data curation. Thank you very much for your interest. We have a project website. We also have the paper available. It's published and open access. And yes, contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja. So we are at 12:30, but if folks have questions, I think maybe the speakers could stick around for a few more minutes. So any questions? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then I think we can close the session. Thank you all for attending and for your patience.